I'm excited to welcome our next speaker, Lea Pica. Lea is a digital analyst turned data storytelling advocate who teaches thousands of data and marketing practitioners how to inspire action and impact. She's the host of the popular Present Beyond Measure Show podcast and the blogger at leapica.com. Lea is also the creator of Data Storytelling Bootcamp and Pica Protocol, her practical prescription for delivering data stories that inform decisions, spark ideas, and drive change. Welcome, Lea, and thank you for joining us at the Business Storyteller Summit.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I wish I'd had my virtual Fireside chat background, but
I would love to see that.
I'll have to find it. Exactly.
We will be talking about storytelling, and there's one aspect that is really interesting to me, and I'm sure also to the audience. Could you tell us your personal story behind the journey into data presentation? What led you to shift your career path from digital analyst to data storytelling advocate?
Oh man, I love this story. I have a background in musical theater and performance, and somewhere along the way, I decided having a stable job in corporate was going to be a better way to pay the bills. And what I started to find was that I would present information. I took different roles as a digital analyst, as analytics manager, even on the client side. And I was in up to 7 to 8 presentations and meetings a day, like many others. And I just found that whether I was presenting or whether I was an audience member, nothing would happen after this meeting. And during the meeting, I would see people falling asleep, eyes glazed over, checking their email, on the fly. And something kept telling me that something was wrong with this entire process. I would go to industry conferences and I would fall asleep in the middle of them and think like, this is supposed to be the best of the best. And I walk out time and time again, wondering, what should I do now? That is like the burning question that audience members have when they go into a meeting or presentation. So I was asked randomly to do a presentation for my MBA on social media, and I decided to use Prezi to do it. And I was utterly confused by the platform, and I decided maybe I don't know anything about presentation or design or anything like that. So I picked up a book called Presentation Zen by Gar Reynolds, and it changed my entire life, as you can see, because I suddenly realized there is a true art and science behind triggering an audience into feeling emotions and motivation and stimulating them intellectually and getting them to take action. And we're all doing it wrong. That was the first thought that went through my head. So I really went down a very deep rabbit hole and learned everything I could from Stephen Few, data visualization, and Nancy Duarte's, storytelling mechanics, and started applying everything to my work. And for one particular data scenario we had, I was amazed at the results that I finally generated from using this practice. And it became such a high profile project that people asked me, how did I do it? What did you do in that presentation? I feel so invigorated. And I suddenly realized that this is a thing that needs to be talked about. No one was talking about it this way in the industry. So I was invited to speak at my dear friend 4C as a client during one of their client summits. And I begged them to let me choose this as a topic. They took a chance on me. And it was my first session ever. And it's still one of their top 3 highest rated sessions of all time from what they told me, because I think this was such an important topic to finally address. And I just feel that there's so many tools available to practitioners, but there's no preparing us for this in colleges. Now there is, but back when I was in college, there was no data storytelling or corporate communication or things like that. So once the momentum began building around me speaking at these events, I think people really just saw that I was trying to fill a pretty big gap in the industry skill set. And it's just been amazing from there.
That's a great story. I love it. And I also love it that you mentioned Nancy Duardo, because she's also one of our speakers. So,
Excellent.
right, there is some synergy here.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, from this experience that you mentioned, that it was so boring at the beginning, and then you read the book and you started, like, you know, deep diving into this. Like, what do you think are the biggest mistakes that people actually do when talking about their data or trying to visualize the data?
Oh, there are many. And I think we'll talk about this a bit when I take you through kind of this before and after that I have prepared. Um, it's really that I don't want to give that one away, so I'll save one of them. But the first big mistake is saying, I'm going to present what I think, what I want to present, and I think what they asked for. But what practitioners are not always equipped to do is instead put themselves in the shoes of the audience on behalf of the customer or the end user and say, what does my stakeholder or client need to make this decision, to be successful, to love what we're doing, so that the end customer benefits from that? But it really, in order to enact that change, you have to frame it in how it's going to benefit the stakeholder. And, you know, part of that is also inspiring empathy for the customer, which is part of what I teach. But you have to speak the stakeholders' language. You have to understand what their aspirations are, what's the top project on their list, what's keeping them up at night, what's their biggest obstacle, and how are you going to make their life better? And when you frame your data analysis and the insights that you bring to that presentation within those questions, rather than, well, they just said, you know, give me everything, or they want visits. Instead of listening to the words that are coming out of their mouth, which may not actually represent what they really need, because they're not trained in our language, you are literally the Rosetta Stone between your data, the raw numbers, and their needs.
That makes sense. I think also, like, sometimes people try to show too much data, and then, like, the audience is just overwhelmed with this as well.
Yes, not a lot of people know that we're not able to really carry more than 3 to 5 chunks, like a idea or an action in our brain at once. So we'll go in with 50 different data points that don't necessarily relate to each other, and then we'll recommend 100 different recommendations for that, or maybe the recommendations don't even tie to the insights that we presented. We're just trying to go through in kind of a docket style way, and it's just too much for their brains to handle. So I always say, what are the things, the decisions that they can make now that will have the most impact, that is going to get them to be successful in the immediate term? And if you're planning for longer term, then make that holistic, but focus on the biggest impact with usually the least amount of effort.
And why do you think it is so challenging to talk about data?
Well, 2020 actually put a magnifying glass on why it's so hard to talk about data. You know, especially when there are emotions involved, and you might think that data-driven organizations and cultures mean that I'm devoid of any emotions and I'm dispassionate. It's not true. Until machines are running company decisions entirely, there's going to be emotions and opinions coming into play. So part of this is kind of separating fact from fiction. What are the true pieces of observational data versus my own interpretation and my own biases of this? How can I instill that trust in my stakeholders so that they don't feel I'm bringing too much of a bias to the table? And with 2020, it's so emotional that it's almost like, well, what is true anymore? There's so many conflicting things. So I recently had Professor Alberto Cairo on my podcast. He's the Knight Chair of Data Visualization for the University of Miami. And he, right before COVID, released a book called How Charts Lie. So timely, because it focused a lot on how the media often can create misinterpretations of data because the chart isn't designed in a user-friendly way. And one of the things that he said on my show that I really loved was that it's not about getting total accuracy to build trust. It's about communicating your level of confidence and why, and saying, this is the best decision that we can recommend to you based on this level of confidence. It's transparency if you don't have 100% accuracy that builds trust. So I thought that was amazing.
I definitely need to check out this episode of podcast.
Yeah, sure. I'll send it.
I'm glad you mentioned as well 2020 because I wanted to ask you about it. It definitely is bringing new challenges for data storytellers as well. I mean, there's a lot of challenges, but also on top of it, now because many of us work from home, it means that annual reports will need to be presented remotely as well.
Mhm.
And what are some strategies you would recommend for keeping virtual audience engaged during such a presentation where, it might be boring as well, and then the audience is not even in the same room?
Yeah, so doing it virtually definitely presents unique challenges, whether it's a long annual report or a pitch. And what you have to remember is that however energetic you feel you are in a live environment where your body is creating a field of energy, and you have their mostly rapt attention, now you're fighting against browser tabs and notifications and social media dings and and pets and kids and everything. So I actually taught a whole masterclass this summer around building a home office fortress and nailing Zoom meetings. Like for me, the biggest keys are how you start, how you kick things off. I have something called a meeting superhero script that I'm going to be actually blogging about very soon. That is like this foolproof script to get people to shut off their phones, to pay better attention, how to get their questions answered, all of these things that just shows that you are taking the reins of that meeting. That immediately gathers people's attention right away. And then understanding the different psychological triggers and dynamics that happen, such as when you're presenting online, if you don't stop and ask a question to the audience, or you don't change things up with a video, or you don't allow for any conversation or dialogue, just one run-on sentence, you might actually lose them much more easily because you're in a small square. So understanding those kinds of dynamics, one of my favorite things is if I'm relaying an insight, I like to split it into multiple slides and build anticipation that way. So I might say, you asked us to look into this and this is what we found and it was interesting. However, when we dug a little deeper, we were actually surprised by something else. And you pause for a second and everyone's pauses snap people's attention back because we're designed to be alerted to sudden silence. And then you make your big reveal. This is what we found. Crazy, right? And everyone's like, whoa, and you're letting it sit with them. So there are, there are psychological triggers that can be used that I teach in my material that are sourced from cinematic practices, right from movies and TV, because these are how stories are best told, right? The most compelling ways, and those can translate to a meeting environment.
That's amazing. I love this example as well, that you can take some tricks from movies and also apply it to your presentation. I think no,
That's right.
not all of us would think that this is possible, but it totally makes sense now that you told me this as well. And from the tips, so I get it, with the pausing as well, and building this anticipation. Is this something that you could use for pitch presentations? I'm asking about this because quite some of our attendees at the Business Storyteller Summit are founders of startups who are preparing to raise money. And obviously, the data part is a very important aspect of an investment pitch. So I was just wondering, like, maybe you have some tips, like, how to as well grab attention of investors, because they see a lot of this presentation, so you need to stand out.
Absolutely. I love this question because I teach a framework that I've adapted from another consultant in my courses and workshops. And it was based in a persuasive framework geared towards securing funding for venture capital. I adapted it to be a persuasive format for digital analytics or data analytics readout or a conversion rate test, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But many of the mechanics are the same, even though the data is really important. There's nothing that triggers an audience to feel and remember and take action more than a well-told story. And if you can contextualize, for example, if you're pitching for a nonprofit, let's say, don't just rattle off the numbers of like, well, we sent bottles of water to this many people. Contextualize that number and like, we sent as many bottles as there are stars in galaxy, or like could fit in a sports stadium, or bring a real relatable real world concept to that. And the absolute thing you have to do is make that story relatable also to the benefit to the investor. Again, they are the stakeholders going to help you move forward and make that decision. So how is it going to benefit the investor? And how is it ultimately going to serve your customer and your mission? Because naturally they want to get behind a mission, right? What I find, and this fly is definitely loving everything I'm saying. What I find happens, whether it's, software vendors or, consultancies, things like this, is right away they focus on them. They focus on the story of the company, the features of the technology, but they are not engaging them in this big why. Why should we invest in you? What are the stories that you can illustrate for us that will demonstrate the impact that we will have by choosing you? Does that help?
Yeah, that's a good tip, because that definitely is like the most important aspect, right? Like if you are competing against other founders as well for investment, like you have to show like what makes you unique and why they should invest in you.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
And another question is about presentation formats as well. I would be interested to know, from your experience, which format is the most effective when telling story behind your data? Is it a dashboard, an infographic, a presentation? Like, what do you think resonates the most with the audience, and why?
So I'm a little biased because I specialize in a live presentation format with a linear type tool like PowerPoint or Google Slides or Keynote, simply because you're able to leverage the step-by-step storytelling mechanics and dramatic dynamics of a narrator. I imagine someone standing in front of a campfire and telling their tribe this amazing story of ancestors, like it's kind of like that, and transmitting that information. I actually had a recent post on LinkedIn on why I don't equate dashboards with data stories. For me, they are very different formats, because a dashboard, if really well done, is like a car dashboard. It empowers a driver or a user to be able to read the vital systems of their business and be able to make very fast decisions with total confidence. A well-designed dashboard, in my view, does not require a weekly presentation or saying, is this right? It should empower those decisions. And that frees up an analyst to do much deeper analysis work that would be presented during a larger format where they have to act as the narrator. I always say, like, I don't get in my car and my dashboard says, Leah's almost out of gas. She has to get eggs. Is she going to make it to the gas station? What will happen? Like, this is not what happens. I know I'm low on gas. I know I have to go to the station. But if if my oil light or some kind of alert light is going on and I don't know how to solve that, then I bring it to a mechanic to be solved. So for me, the data presentation is going to the mechanic and getting the full story in a language I can understand. And then I'm empowered to make those decisions, but I don't have to know how a carburetor and an engine and all of the car parts hook up. So now people are starting to combine these things where rather than a dashboard, because if you present a dashboard during a live meeting, you will lose your audience. They will look at every single number on there at once and they'll stop listening to you. That's what happens during a live session. However, that doesn't mean that you can't bring, say a Tableau workbook with you that has an interactive graph where you can actually explore the data together. You might have a solid story framework, but you say, but I wanted to show you guys a little behind the scenes of the data, and we can kind of take questions, or we can explore it together. And then on the fly, you're also, seeing how they can help you understand your story better. So those are some starting points for understanding the difference. But when it comes to actually relaying a step-by-step story, I do favor the presentation.
Me too. It's also not that easy to create a dashboard that is really effective. It's definitely more challenging.
That's a whole other whole other barrel.
It's an art by itself as well.
It really is. It absolutely is.
But I think especially since we do have a lot of startup founders attending this summit, I have a question as well related to this, that, when you are communicating the company's growth, it's quite crucial as well to do it on a regular basis, either weekly or monthly. How can you make sure that everyone is aligned and focused on the goals, first of all? And what are some best practices you would recommend to basically, keep your audience engaged as well, and everyone across the board, across the company, excited about the numbers?
Interesting. So, in socializing, you're saying outside of a presentation, socializing information so that everyone can feel involved?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the very most important thing is whether you're sending handouts or an email report, it's going to depend on the environment, but you really want to use a narrative voice and tone when you're sending information. And you don't have to only be in person to give a narrative structure. Look at, comic books. They are a visual medium with some text that illustrate a story, but they inspire you to turn the page and learn more. So that is the question. How can we make it so that it's in a language that everyone understands and it's relayed in a way that creates excitement because people really understand what's happening, but they also understand things like, what will they gain if they decide to go forward with this project? Is it more efficiency, more revenue, more profit, whatever, higher customer satisfaction? Maybe more importantly, though, what will you lose if you don't take action? There is a psychological dynamic called loss aversion, where humans would actually forego a gain or a benefit if it meant not losing something. They'd rather not lose something than gain. And it depends on your audience. You might have an audience that's very optimistic. So they want to hear everything in terms of what's the upside? But for the most part, we're survival oriented and we want to make sure we don't actually lose footing. So oftentimes I'll try to pitch, results in terms of, by doing nothing, if we let this continue, we could be leaving this on the table. And I have found that to be a really powerful motivator for audiences.
And that could be also used as a tactic as well for engaging employees, right? Because let's say if you talk about revenue, there will be specific departments that will be interested in it, but maybe it could be a bit more difficult to interest the developers in the revenue aspect as well. So how could you use this tactic of like, what would you lose and gain with an audience like that?
Wait, so repeat the question because I'm not exactly sure.
So basically,
I
like
understand how it's different.
let's say you want to make sure that like the whole company is excited about like your revenue goal, that like we have to double the revenue, let's say within the next quarter or something. And obviously like departments such as sales and marketing, which are like a bit closer to the revenue goal, for them it will be easier to get them excited about this. But it might be a bit more challenging for other departments, like your engineering department or product department. Is there anything like from the tactics you mentioned about like losing something or gaining something that founders could use as well to make sure that like everyone is excited? Because obviously the engineering team and the product team would also need to be like caring about it, right? Because they are building the product that will enable the revenue as well.
Well, it's kind of interesting because when you think about people not in a decision-making capacity, they kind of have to, if a decision comes from above, they have to do it. Most cases, it's not about motivating them. Like, would they be like, no, I don't feel like it. I mean, unless things have changed since I left corporate. But yeah, it makes sense to want to get practitioners or the people actually executing excited as well. And again, it's all about what are the benefits. That I think is a role for the leadership, because for me, the practitioner is trying to show the benefits to the decision makers. The decision makers are going to have to go out and motivate their staff to get excited. I don't know that it's the practitioner's role to translate the benefits from a particular decision to each involved department necessarily. I mean, that sounds like an amazing aspiration to take on, but I do think that is where leaders have to get more involved and create cheerleaders for their decisions out of their departments.
Yeah, that makes sense. And how this is actually a question from one of our attendees who is also a founder. He asked like how to turn facts and numbers to be more interesting when my story is just normal. I don't know exactly what he meant by just normal, but that's how the question was phrased. And how to make an everyday story more compelling.
Yeah, this is a very common question. And I think there's a couple things at play here. First, the results might not be in translating into a direct benefit to the company. Like what are these numbers actually saying about our success? Are we on track? Are we off track? Hey, if we're on track, woohoo, let's celebrate, and then make that celebratory and say, well, how can we grow from here? If you're not on track, you're like, whoa, guys, how do we what's the plan for getting back on track? We have to do that. Another thing is that I had to deliver weekly dashboards to my agency clients. And the story felt the same week after week, except if it was a holiday, because I was in e-commerce. And I actually think that that's part of the issue. I like decision-based meetings. I like that we're meeting because we have a series of decisions we're interested in making. We want to understand what we can do. The dashboards are great for these sort of taking the pulse of things. But if you're presenting data week after week and it never changes, why are you presenting it week after week? Couldn't everyone's time be used better? And sometimes that's a cultural shift because people get very attached to the way that they meet and the regularity, and they feel safe. But this is about empowering the stakeholder to feel more confident in between presentations so that when you are in front of them, wow, you have a whole month of data to talk about with them. With larger data sets like that, inevitably you're going to have an easier time finding something interesting to focus on. With these small data sets, it's kind of finding like a microscopic needle in a very small haystack. So make the haystack bigger. in a way, and you'll probably find more needles. So I suggest people kind of do some soul searching around the frequency of meetings, establishing a very clear objective and purpose for meetings. No more campaign overview or data review style meetings where no one really understands what the purpose is and what roles that they're playing. And then the last thing is that I love this idea of translating numbers to a relatable concept. This is kind of what I mentioned before, where you could just say like 50,000 people did this or that or the other, or you can translate that to a grouping of some kind. How many times would that wrap around the Earth? How far would that lead to space? How is it different in terms of time? Like, I heard this amazing comparison that if you earn $1 million, think of that as 1 week of your life. And then the difference between that and $1 billion, it doesn't sound a whole lot different to us, is 33 years versus a week.
Wow.
And that put into context, a lot of the income inequality issues that we're seeing crop up, especially this year with everything going on, where certain companies have reached trillionaire status and, many people are really in deep hardship. So that kind of comparison can, like what you just did when you said, wow, I don't think you had seen that difference before in that way. So, there's lots of great ways to contextualize numbers to something tangible in this world.
Yeah, it makes it as well way more accessible, right? Because it builds a story around the data and makes it more understandable for like an audience that like maybe would not be able like to imagine or like assess it in their mind. And I think that's also the difference between being data informed and data driven, because often, like you mentioned, that like, if you do this weekly updates on data, nothing is changing because the frequency is just too frequent to see anything. Then you are maybe data informed, but it doesn't particularly have an impact on you. But there is a difference between being also data driven.
Yeah. And, I'm going to give a slight spoiler alert. I'm actually writing my first book, which I'm hoping will be coming
Congrats.
out next quarter, Q1. Thank you. And the key is that it's not around being data driven, it's around being story driven. So I'm really excited about that little shift in perspective, because it's the stories that motivate people to act at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's even better. I will definitely read the
true
book.
Stories, true database stories.
Yeah, I think like the teaser is already very interesting, so I'm sure the audience will be also interested. So you said the beginning of the next year, right? That the book will be out.
That's what my publisher is committing me to, and I'm very, very excited about it. So yes,
we are excited as well. So we'll be crossing fingers that it is going to happen in Q1.
Yep. Yep.
Before this session, I also asked you to prepare an example of a before and after data visualization. I thought that, like, obviously, because we are talking as well about stories and visualization, I felt that this would be more tangible for the audience than just us, like, talking about it, that it would be better to show them something and make them understand. So it would be great if you could pull up the slides and maybe guide us as well through the process of, like, how you have optimized the slides.
Sure. Let me just bring it up. And there we go. Can you see my full slide?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay. So, something that I actually gave a clue to this before, but I left you with a cliffhanger on purpose because I said I would mention it. So the key missing piece that I find from most people's data stories and their presentation is actually going to surprise you. It's an actual story. And then people will think, well, what does that mean exactly? So, this might be a slide that I would have presented years ago, and it's got all of the regular things. It's a title, it's a graph, it's got bullets. What could possibly be wrong? And there's all different reasons why there's issues with this, but the biggest is that when you look at this, if someone had a business question, believe it or not, the business question would be, how did our website redesign affect abandonment, visitor abandonment on our top navigation pages? And you look at this and you're like, there's a lot going on here. People's eyes are zooming around. The graph is all over the place. So in this case, I won't describe why I'm choosing this chart type, but I would choose something else that looks like this. This is called a slope graph. A slope graph is an excellent chart choice for visualizing before and after change, or differences in, cohorts of some kind, like, if you have like men versus women answering a study, a survey of some kind, anything that compares 2 points where there's change. This is a fantastic thing. And on my blog, I actually have a detailed post on how to create one of these. So, people think that, well, if I choose the right chart, that solves the problem, right? No, because this is just data, but this is not actually a story. And that's the distinction I want to make very, very clear. And I'm going to show you the exact mechanics of what that story means to me specifically. So there's something called narrative arc, and it's this invisible structure that is in every well-told story. It is a rising and falling effect where there is a transformation that a hero undergoes under the guide of some sort of expert, like Yoda or Mr. Miyagi, things like that, to Luke and things. So the arc looks like this, and you don't see it, you don't do it this way in your PowerPoint. Want to make that distinction. But you're starting here where this line is, or the audience is starting here. This is your business or project or test where it is today. This is where it's called the exposition. So here we meet the hero. Here he is, la, 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 and he's walking along and life is okay, right? Life is just where it is, but there's probably something missing. This is where you establish context for your analysis and past performance, and maybe review KPIs, and you're literally setting the stage for your audience to understand, where are we today? Then the next part is called rising action. Things are starting to get interesting. You're starting to reveal your first insights that, these are questions that they might have asked that they don't know the answer to yet. And you're giving them that information, but you're hinting that there's something that you might have surprised you, or that something they're afraid of would happen might be happening. You're kind of weighing on these pressure points of, where are people invested in that story? So as you're building your insights and, you lead up to something where you really want to inspire a change, that's when you build the climax. Things are very precarious right now. If you don't take any action, this, or, our abandonment is really high, or, something that is going to weigh on the emotions, our customer satisfaction is down and we think it's because of this. And if we don't take action, this is what we might lose. You want to agitate that problem to the point where the audience has to know the solution to this, or they're going to leave very uncomfortable. And that's when you begin the falling action. This is where you go through methodically. Well, don't worry. We have a whole set of recommendations. We have a plan for you. Like, we've thought this through. These are what we're recommending. This is how we should go about it. These are the folks that would probably make the most sense to do it. And then finally, you have your resolution. You walk out of that meeting not having completed the story loop. That's for the next meeting. But you walk out with a plan that alleviates the concern that the story has created by giving everyone a roadmap of exactly where to go next to provide a resolution to that problem. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't see this arc in most of the corporate presentations that I see. Definitely none of the ones that I used to do. So I'd love to show you, if I can, how that would translate to a data scenario. Okay, so here is, our data. What I might do for, the first part of this insight is say, okay, I'm going to show you, you asked to see what was the abandonment rate on our main pages before and after our site update. So we started here. These are the 3 main pages we looked at. Homepage, About Us, Products 47, not too bad. And really great news. When we looked at after, all of our pages decreased in abandonment rate. This is really great news. So congrats, everyone. Great job. See how I'm like trying to get people excited.
Exactly.
Now, the thing is, though, there is one major navigation page missing from this chart, and you might be guessing what it is already. And there's a reason why we didn't show it to you yet. And this is what we'd like to focus on. First, it's amazing that our homepage abandonment decreased this way. We really want to call that out. That was a big reduction. But now we're looking at the contact us page. So unfortunately, something about our redesign actually increased abandonment by, a certain percentage after this update. And we think it's possibly due to the fact that the form was pushed below the fold. We didn't actually realize this was going to happen in our, UX redesign or whatever, people are doing there. So, notice here what I'm doing. I'll just take a pause. Oops. Notice that for like great news, I used like a inspiring blue color to highlight the point that I wanted people to see. But when it came to the news around something we lost, I'm using like an impactful deep red to say, but guys, this is actually, we can celebrate tonight, but tomorrow we have to focus on this because this page is connected to our customers, right? This is a very important page. So here you can additionally annotate saying like, I'm so sorry. I'm trying to move the Zoom bar. Here's what we recommend. We want to work with user experience to move that form back up the fold as soon as possible. And you know what? We're getting a lot of traffic to that page now, thanks to the redesign, but we might lose over 500 inquiries per month. That could be $50,000 in sales per month. So you see how that might like really lean on a pressure point for the audience rather than just saying, well, it decreased. Thanks, guys. And at this point, this is that, real climax, like, oof, that climax. And I'm starting to create that falling action. So, when I present the actual recommendation and opportunity cost, I'm providing a resolution. And that resolution is who's going to work, who are the teams that are going to work on it, who's going to do it by when, who's going to make sure that they're working on it, and is it achievable in a reasonable time frame. And having that plan when you walk out is what will allow people to feel resolved. And that for me is the biggest missing factor from data presentations. This can actually be done in a printed report that you might send over email. This one view actually encapsulates all of those points where someone is reading to themselves that, yes, we decrease homepage abandonment, which is great, but contact went us. And in very succinct sentences, I'm showing the interpretation of data and what the recommendation is for action.
So this could be like the last one could be a one pager that, let's say, you could maybe send it via email. Like if let's say you cannot present it, right? Like
right. Absolutely.
I really like
be
this
more
story.
Potent. Yeah, it'll be more powerful in that live format. However, you can absolutely create a story over email if you want. I'm glad you like it.
Yeah, it was great. I actually, when you showed already the first slide, it was really confusing, the first version. But I did notice that the contact us form, like I immediately looked at this too, and I was like, what is going on? Is it like good or bad?
Right, exactly. And yeah, you are going to be able to pick certain things out. But for the most part, unless you're looking at data as a regular part of your role, you're just going to get overwhelmed by all of that text and different colors, and the colors aren't pointing you to a particular insight. You're not sure where the story actually is. And the
Mm.
more work that you create for your audience while you're speaking, the less they're going to listen to you. You want to keep
Yeah.
that attention on you as the narrator.
Probably even difficult to listen because if you have so much information there and like, you are even having a hard time to read the graph, you cannot
Mhm.
listen at the same time while you are trying to understand what is on the slide as well.
That's right.
Mhm.
That's right. The minute it's a very interesting mechanic where when we have a PowerPoint deck or some kind of deck with us, there's a split second where our eyes are attuned to the motion when we switch slides. Our eyes are inevitably drawn there, away from the speaker, and they're looking to corroborate what they're seeing with what the speaker is saying.
Mm.
And as soon as it does that and it keeps talking, like the slide just has words and it talks over you, they stop listening. We are not able to pay attention to two different things at the same time. Multitasking is a myth.
That's very true. That's why you have to have an interesting story so that the audience focuses on you.
That's right. It helps to be interesting. Yes.
Definitely. Lea, thank you so much for all of these amazing tips. Like I could actually talk with you for 1 hour more because
Right.
I
I know.
I love this topic about data visualization and like how to improve it and how to incorporate it into the presentation. And I'm sure that the audience will want to learn more about it as well. So I wanted to give you a chance maybe as well to talk a bit about the workshops that you offer and also because you prepared something for that and these there is a free assessment for data presentation skills that they can find on your speakers page as well.
Yes, absolutely. So, first, I have converted all of my corporate training packages to be delivered virtually anywhere around the world. It's no problem, whether it's a company keynote or a 2-day workshop. So absolutely, visit my speaker page, come to my website, leapica.com/contact, and, I'm happy to get in touch with you. But for you guys specifically, I spent all summer hammering away at creating a new online assessment to help practitioners and leaders understand where their biggest blind spots are in terms of presenting data effectively. There are these silent killers that we don't know about that are hurting our chances of success. And this assessment is designed to point to your biggest one, a few strategies of how to overcome that quickly, and a resource I offer to help plug those gaps right away. And if you are a practitioner as well, I do offer online courses that you can take in a self-guided or a guided perspective with me, and all that information will be available there.
That's amazing. Perfect. So it's on the same website as the assessment as well, right? That they can find the workshops.
The assessment is a slightly different website. It's leapica.com/killer quiz. So I want to make
Mhm.
sure I give that. And then my website will have lots of information about courses and the different options available to everybody.
Great. We'll definitely check it out. Thank you so much, Lea, once again for joining us and for sharing all your expertise and knowledge. It was really interesting.
Oh, I'm so happy you had me on. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.